Expectations, a word that is often preceded by great, high, lofty. When I was asked to come and speak to you all tonight, my first thought was, what would be expected? How long should the speech be? Could I use notes? Would there be a teleprompter? I had come to the school last year to talk to students about a kindness project I was working on. Would I be expected to talk about that? I started watching videos of other talks to see if there was a certain cadence or pacing that was more impactful than others. And then I watched more videos because there is no greater form of procrastination than weeping as you watch soldiers being reunited with their families. I spent hours doing research because I thought if I was going to take this on, I wanted to live up to expectations. Expectations really are everywhere. Target tells us to expect more, pay less. Doritos tells us to expect the unexpected. Audi tells us that they're built from new expectations. Expectations can be wonderful motivators. Studies have found that a student's performance can be directly linked to how much their teacher expects of them. In the great Facebook procrastination series, Tom versus Time, Tom Brady talks about how having sky-high expectations for himself have kept him at the top of his game far longer than anyone else would have expected. But expectations can also be terribly tricky to navigate, because if they're not properly managed, if you cling to them too tightly, they can lead to heartbreak. 30 years ago, my parents were expecting a baby, and when that baby came into the world, he was perfect. He scored a perfect 10 on his APGAR test, he was a whopping 10 pounds, and he slept for 7 straight hours on his very first night home from the hospital. But a few months later, a pediatrician noticed that that baby's eyes weren't following conversations quite as well as they should. My brother David was diagnosed with Fragile X syndrome. It's the most common form of genetically inherited intellectual impairment. And in an instant, everything that my parents had expected from the life of their only son went out the window. There would be no Little League, no driver's license, no graduation day. My parents were heartbroken. This life was not the one they had expected. But even when I was just a kid, or maybe because I was just a kid, I knew that being close to someone with Fragile X was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. You see, my brother David has grown up to be a star. He can walk into any room and make everyone in that room feel special. He can talk to you about your friends, your spouse, your siblings, your teachers, and he'll ask you questions and actually remember your answers. He doesn't care where you went to school or what you do for a living or how much money you make. He's not interested in what you can do for him, unless you can take him out for Chinese food, then he likes you a whole lot. Every day, he manages to wrangle his misfiring synapses to find a way to engage other people. All he wants is to connect. He loves to feel like he's part of something, a group, our family, his basketball team. There are some who think that people like David should be separated from the rest of the population. But the truth is, having Fragile X only enhances his humanity. But there are still a lot of things that he can't do. He's never been able to sit and read a book. He has no idea that 2 + 2 = 4. And he may never be able to live on his own. It used to drive me nuts watching my mom cry and as she wondered why this had to happen to David, why he had to go through life like this. And I would say to her, but Mom, why would you focus on what's wrong when there's so much right? David is kind and patient and loving, and he can remember the name of every person he's ever met. I can hardly say nice to meet you anymore because it's come back to haunt me so many times. But everybody loves him. He could have had a typical brain and an ordinary life and been a real jerk that no one likes. So honestly, I think that this is really much better. And she'd pause for a moment and say, You can't understand. And she's right. I can't. Because I'd never looked forward to the day the training wheels would come off his bike. I never anticipated this boy becoming a man. I never dreamed of the life that he would have. Being a sibling of a person with intellectual differences is very different than being a parent. You see, when David was born a few months after my 4th birthday, I didn't have hopes for him. I didn't have dreams for him. I didn't have expectations. I was just excited that there was going to be a new baby, and there was. So it's easier for me to see that Fragile X doesn't define David. It's not the beginning and the end of who he is as a person. Siblings aren't haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. But parents can find them lurking in every corner. And while I didn't have a list of expectations for my brother, I certainly had them for myself. I was 22 when I realized that I liked girls. I've heard stories of people who knew they were gay at 12, but when I was 12, yes, I had a poster of Angelina Jolie on my wall, but I thought that was just because she was great in Girl Interrupted. So when I found myself attracted to a woman right after I graduated from college, I was surprised. I'd grown up in a typical New Jersey suburban town. I had gay friends. I was aware that some of my family members were gay. I'd even spent time in Provincetown. But it never occurred to me that my own life would move in that direction. It didn't take long for my surprise to give way to fear. I'd lay awake at night wondering how I would tell the people that I care about that I wasn't who they expected me to be. I imagined that they would be surprised. I'd never been boy crazy like some of the other girls in my high school, but all of my friends would say that eventually I would meet a guy who would change all that. What would happen when they found out that wouldn't be the way my story would unfold? I ached at the thought of telling my family. My parents are both wonderful, open-minded people, but I was convinced that telling them that I was gay would crush a whole other set of their dreams. You see, I'm their only child that can ever get married. I'm their only hope for grandchildren. And I know they want these things. And they never put pressure on me to fulfill these expectations, but I was keenly aware they existed. And that was fine with me because I wanted those things too. I wish I could say I was cool enough to never wonder about what my wedding day would be like, but I had. And ever since I was a girl and got my first doll, I knew I wanted to be a mother. And the thought of missing out on those things was terrifying. But you might say, well, of course you can have those things. But this was 2006. At the time, Massachusetts was the only state where gay people could legally get married. And I'm not that old. I think because there's still so much more progress to be made, sometimes we can lose track of how far we've come in such a short time. Imagine what it would have been like to have these feelings in 1996 or even 1956. Even in 2006, I wondered if I should try to keep these feelings at bay, if I should figure out a way to make the life I had expected myself to lead work. These thoughts led to many nights of crying myself to sleep. My heartache was no doubt fueled by this stereotypical notion of my own thoughts of what it meant to what I could expect to live as a gay person. As I was trying to sort out my feelings, I made a list in my mind. One column had reasons I'm not gay. I love long hair and short dresses. And then the other column had reasons I might be gay. I was an above average softball player. Seriously, it was that remedial, but it was all I could do to make sense of it. I would watch hours of the L Word trying to find myself in these seriously gorgeous women, and more often than not, I just ended up feeling more confused. But then slowly, excruciatingly slowly, I started to tell people the truth about who I was. And the strangest thing happened. It turns out that people are so wrapped up in their own expectations that pretty much they don't have time to create some for you. People were overwhelmingly supportive and happy for me. It wasn't always easy, and there were a lot of tears shed along the way, but in total, I faced an incredibly small amount of resistance. I am for sure one of the lucky ones. And in a few months, I will marry a woman who is more exquisite than I could have ever imagined. A woman who I met 2.5 years ago when I was heartbroken and convinced that my choices had done irrevocable damage to my life. A woman who loves me and encourages me to fulfill my potential, but is there for me when I come up short of expectations. My brother's life has taught me that clinging to expectations leads to heartbreak, that dealing with life's disappointments leads to an open heart, and that taking care and paying attention can be the ultimate acts of love. And being gay has taught me that if the mind tries to live up to every expectation, it can become a very dangerous place. I never would have expected to learn these lessons, but I'm so grateful to have learned them young. Thank you.